The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Liberty. Liberty.
Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
It's all about the I words: impeachment, infrastructure, identity politics. We'll talk all of it over. Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. As the Democrats' left-wing base raises its voice demanding the impeachment of President Trump, Trump continues to defy subpoenas and dares the Democrats to take action. Nancy Pelosi scuttles a possible infrastructure bill by making a scandalous accusation against the president right before a meeting with Trump. And we'll get to an almost breathtaking statement on identity politics in a moment. Plus, Trump's key economic advisor, Stephen Moore, is back with us to discuss trade and tariffs and taxes. LibertyNation.com Managing Editor Mark Angelides joins us from the UK to discuss the fall of British Prime Minister Theresa May and what might come next. And LibertyNation.com Legal Affairs Editor Scott Cosenza jumps on board with a couple of heartening stories for lovers of liberty.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We kick things off with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out a virtual assembly line of wacky, astonishing, damnable, and ultimately revealing things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. And we start with a couple of very revealing statements. The first one by the newest love child of the left, Stacey Abrams, loser of the Georgia gubernatorial race last November, who claimed without evidence that the election was essentially stolen from her. She may add her name to the 24 Democrats already running for president, or may be a favorite for the vice presidency. But what she said this week flies directly in the face of Democrats who deny that their party has been taken over by identity politics.
The internal threat we face is a fear of who we are. The notion of identity politics has been peddled for the last 10 years, and it's been used as a dog whistle to say that we shouldn't pay too much attention to the new voices coming into progress. I would argue that identity politics is exactly who we are, and it's exactly how we won.
In other words, it matters most what your race or gender or sexual orientation is, rather than the content of your character. But as health care continues to be an issue of primary concern for the American people, there was also, finally, an admission by one of the architects of Obamacare, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky of Illinois, that Obamacare has been a failure.
I've been for Medicare for All since many of you have been born, but I'm also the co-sponsor of Medicare for America. I helped write the Affordable Care Act. I'm for improving it. I'm for all the plans because what we have now is not working.
And yet, despite the now admitted failure of Obamacare, voters in last year's midterm election still somehow trusted Democrats to fix health care more than Republicans, which mostly tells you that the GOP has failed to come up with any kind of viable health care alternative. We thought that maybe we'd have some kind of infrastructure proposal or agreement at least by now after Trump, Pelosi, and Schumer met a while back and seemed to agree on the essentials. But then right before a follow-up meeting scheduled for this week, Nancy Pelosi torpedoed any chance at a deal by running to the cameras and saying this.
We believe that no one is above the law, including the President of the United States, and we believe that the President of the United States is engaged in a cover-up,
Apparently covering up a crime which did not occur. But never mind that. Trump then reacted with predictable swiftness and decisiveness, walking out of the meeting.
I said, let's have the meeting on infrastructure. We'll get that done easily. That's one of the easy ones. And instead of walking in happily into a meeting, I walk in to look at people that had just said that I was doing a cover-up. I don't do cover-ups.
So then Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer ran to the cameras and described how Trump refused to meet with them after being accused of orchestrating a cover-up.
To watch what happened in the White House would make your jaw drop. We Democrats believe in infrastructure. We believe our roads and bridges need repair. We believe that rural America, as well as inner city America, needs broadband. We believe that to bring clean, new energy around the country, we need a power grid, modernized and updated. We believe in modernizing our transportation fleet with electric cars. We believe in all these things. We are interested in doing infrastructure. It's clear the president isn't.
But Schumer and particularly Pelosi obviously didn't want a deal that might make Trump look good either. If they did, Pelosi would not have accused the president of an impeachable crime right before meeting Trump. Duh. How obvious can it get? But what's not as obvious is how Pelosi should deal with demands for impeaching Trump from her restless left-wing base, especially when there are so many conflicting signals from various Democrats. On the one side, presidential candidates like Beto O'Rourke are pandering to the base.
We should begin impeachment proceedings against Donald Trump. Not something that I take lightly. It's an incredibly serious, sober decision that we should make as a country. Really, the last resort when every other option has failed us.
Translation? If we couldn't get him on collusion or obstruction, let's just go ahead and impeach him and figure out the reason later. But the view of Capitol Hill veteran insider James Clyburn, longtime Democrat congressman, is quite different. He was asked about it by Chuck Todd on NBC.
If you did a secret ballot among the Democratic caucus, yes or no on impeachment, what would the majority likely be?
Oh, the majority would be no. A majority will be for staying steady, staying focused, stay on what we're doing, because this thing is moving in our direction.
Is it? Is it really? As Matthew Continetti of the Washington Free Beacon said on Fox News, Nancy Pelosi is being pushed from all sides.
Pelosi has a big problem on her hands, and the problem is that the initial strategy of kind of presenting voters a pseudo-impeachment by dragging out these hearings was thwarted by President Trump and his policy of no cooperation across the board. And so this has now put the Democrats in a box where the only way that they can attempt to get some of the answers or some of the big publicity they want is through opening an impeachment, even though Pelosi knows impeachment would be futile and likely to backfire politically.
Now, Pelosi's not the only Democrat who's got a problem. Consider Joe Biden, the runaway front runner in the Democrats' presidential primary at this early stage. How is he going to deal with a scandal that could be as bad or worse than Hillary Clinton's email scandal in 2016? And as described by Peter Schweitzer, author of the book Secret Empires, which includes a ton of research on Biden and his son.
Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, got on the payroll of a very corrupt Ukrainian energy company called Burisma in the spring of 2014, where he was paid about $50,000 a month to do, quote unquote, regulatory compliance for this company. And the problem, of course, is Hunter Biden had no background in Ukraine, no background in energy. What he did have was a father who was vice president of the United States, who was responsible for all aid flow of Western dollars going to Ukraine. And Joe Biden made decisions about when to look the other way when money disappeared.
Indeed, one of the lingering questions of the presidential campaign will be how Joe Biden explains away this building scandal and the one about Biden and his son's ties to China, and how the son got a huge business deal with China right after the father made a state visit to China. Meanwhile, we're hearing rumblings of war with Iran, which has reportedly made provocative moves in recent days, threatening to kill and kidnap U.S. soldiers. So Trump has ramped up our readiness to a situation which Senator Tom Cotton of the Senate Armed Services Committee says represents a credible threat.
There can be no doubt that we've seen serious, credible, and increased reporting of threats from Iran across the Middle East, whether their own forces like the Revolutionary Guard Corps or through their proxies like some of the rebel groups that they support in places like Yemen or paramilitary forces in Iraq. The steps that the administration has taken on the recommendation of the Department of Defense, like moving an aircraft carrier into the Persian Gulf or B-52 bombers into the region, are all prudent steps not to take military action against Iran, but to try to deter military action by Iran.
So we are using our capability on offense to play defense with Iran, as the economic sanctions imposed by President Trump continue to cripple the Iranian economy and embolden increasingly widespread opposition to the now 50-year-old Islamic regime in Tehran. Quick break, and then we're back to discuss the resignation of British Prime Minister Theresa May and what it means for the future of Brexit and the European Union.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, because
Truth
is making a
comeback.
We believe that all men are entitled to blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
So it is over for soon-to-be former British Prime Minister Theresa May. The embattled PM culminated her descent into the political wilderness by resigning late this week, effective in a couple of weeks. No doubt her failure to close the deal on Brexit, in fact, to not even come close, sealed her fate and her legacy. And joining us from the UK to discuss and analyze the fallout and the now even more turbulent political landscape is our man on the scene, international correspondent and managing editor for LibertyNation.com, Mark Angelides. Hello, Mark.
Hi, Tim. Good to be here.
Good to have you. So let me ask you this. Why did Theresa May even want this job in the first place? Was she hungry enough for power that she was blinded to the difficulties she was sure to face in making Brexit work?
Well, that's an interesting question, Tim, and one that many people would suggest is a bit of an odd one, because it seems apparent based on her actions over the last 3 years, and bearing in mind that the UK should be out of the European Union by now, that she never actually wanted Britain to leave the EU in the first place. So it wasn't so much that she was hungry enough for power, but more so that she thought she could put a stopper and make it a brino, as we call it, a Brexit in name only.
Right. You mean like putting a doorstop in the door so that the door can't open any wider?
Pretty much that, yes.
Okay, well, she is pretty much history, and you've got a variety of names brought forward as candidates to succeed Theresa May. A couple of Brexit hardliners, an anti-Brexiteer, a moderate, all seen as possibilities. Is this really the acid test for how far the Tories, the Conservative Party, will go in their commitment to Brexit as it was intended and put up for a vote back in 2016?
Well, whoever becomes the next prime minister, it doesn't go out to a general election. It goes to an election within the party, so party members. And there's a couple of things to consider with that. The first one being that last year, I believe it was, the end of last year, beginning of this year, there was a mass movement to join the Conservative Party by people who wanted a no-deal Brexit, a WTO term Brexit. So they could have a vote on who the next prime minister would be and get a real Brexiteer in the job. So there's some Tories in sheep's clothing there who'll certainly be willing to get their hands dirty in terms of making sure an actual Brexiteer takes the top spot. But also with the recent EU elections, what you found is that many of the Conservative Party associations, which are the local branches, which, you know, they're the grassroots activists, and the people who do the actual work of the party on a local level, they were actually not voting for the Conservative Party during these elections. Many of them have been removed from position. Many of them have been censured because they've decided to vote for the Brexit Party, Nigel Farage's new party, as opposed to the party they're supposed to be managing at a local level. So those two things into account, there's a very good chance that at least somebody who's nominally for Brexit will make the top slot.
Now, where does Nigel Farage figure in the calculation of party insiders as to who should be the next prime minister? You've got Boris Johnson, for example, who's a Brexit hardliner. Will Farage be working behind the scenes to make sure that a Brexit hardliner is the next prime minister?
Again, an interesting but odd question. You see, there's some debate as to whether there are any actual real Brexit hardliners left within the Conservative Party. Because when Theresa May put forward her withdrawal agreement bill the first time, many of the ones who we would class as hardline Brexiteers voted against it. And then they voted against it when it came forward a second time. The third time when it came forward, many of them actually jumped ship and decided to vote for it, which essentially means that that the UK is leaving in name only. So whether Nigel Farage, who really will be the kingmaker, I believe, when the next general election comes around, whether he's willing to back any of these potential as you say, hardline Brexiteers or not, that remains to be seen. Because although Nigel has demurred often enough that he has no interest in being prime minister, the odds are moving in his favor, very much so, to be prime minister within the next few years.
Well, thank you, Mark. You've enlightened us as usual, and we'll stay on top of this. You'll stay on top of this for LibertyNation.com. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Tim. Take care.
Mark Angelides, international correspondent and managing editor of LibertyNation.com. Quick break, and then we're back to talk with Trump economic advisor and victim of leftist hate, Stephen Moore.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, because
Truth
is
making
a
comeback.
Far more important than my political future and far more important than yours, the well-being of our country.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now Trump's key economic advisor, and headed for the Federal Reserve before attacks from the left forced him to withdraw from consideration, Stephen Moore, who last week described for us the living hell he was put through by radicals intent on derailing his nomination to the Fed. And this week, we're back to talk with him about trade and tariffs and taxes, all vital elements of the economic agenda he helped the president to formulate. As fears of a trade war with China heat up, Stephen Moore says our current agreements with China hardly amount to so-called free trade.
We don't have a free trade, arrangement with China. I hate tariffs, by the way. I'm a free trade guy. Milton Friedman taught me my economics, and he always said, free trade is one of the most important pillars of prosperity. But, you've got a situation now where we're in a very abusive relationship with China. They lie, they cheat, they steal. They're involved in cyber security issues, espionage. They're involved in hacking into our computer systems. They're stealing our intellectual property. It's a big, big problem. And I'm not so sure that the tariffs are the best way to deal with it, but it's on the table right now. Trump has basically set these tariffs, and I think we have to I think the worst outcome now would be for Trump to stand down. We need China to stand down because there is nothing that Donald Trump is asking of China that is unreasonable. They should stop stealing our intellectual property. They should open up their markets to us. They should reduce their tariffs. They should, stop, the kind of takeover of companies that do business over there. They need to be a more open market system, and they're just not right now.
Well, it seems, Steve, that the president views tariffs as a means, not an end. But how do you square your own strongly held belief in free trade and aversion to protectionism with the president's willing embrace of tariffs?
Well, that's a good question, and I do hate tariffs because they are taxes, but I mean, in this case, and look, people can disagree on this, and I think there's, a good, healthy debate here. But I do think I think you put it very well. In the end, I believe what Trump will accomplish here is freer trade. I think in the end, China will stand down because they cannot withstand 25% tariffs. It'll destroy their economy. And I think they'll give in. And when they do, it'll be better for both countries. We'll have lower tariffs. We'll lower our tariffs. They lower their tariffs. We have an open and free system that's a level playing field. I think both countries can prosper under that kind of situation. But we can't. I don't know about you, Tim. I just don't think we can go forward with this current relationship. If you're in an abusive relationship, you have to get out of it.
Well, and it's been abusive for so long. And this is one issue that the president, before he was president, had hammered on for years. Yes. Every time you heard him talk, he'd talk about how we're being played for suckers by the Chinese. And it seems that Trump is the first one, maybe the only one, who would step up and actually take any action. But China is a U.S. adversary. But the EU is not. Do you think the use of tariffs against the EU is an appropriate policy?
It's interesting because at the G7 meeting, which was now, I forget, 9 months ago, Trump put on the table with the European leaders, why don't we just go to zero tariffs? And that's something that Larry Kudlow and I had really been pressing. And the Europeans who were complaining about, Trump's trade policies, they completely shrieked in horrors when he said, why don't we go to zero tariffs? But that's the solution here. Get rid of tariffs. And Trump put it on the table, and the Europeans backed away from that. So I think in the end of the day, I'm hopeful, and maybe I'm being excessively hopeful. I think we're going to end up with lower tariffs. I mean, we've got a pretty good new U.S., Canada, Mexico trade agreement. By the way, I want to get this in before we close. One of the most important priorities of Congress should be to have an up or down vote on that new NAFTA agreement, because I worked, remember, that was Ronald Reagan's idea to have North America be a free trade zone. And we can't get Nancy Pelosi to bring that issue up for a vote because she knows it will pass. And she's part of a resistance movement. So she's resisting Trump, even though it's something that a lot of Democrats understand is in America's best economic self-interest.
Our guest is Stephen Moore, economist extraordinaire here on Liberty Nation Radio. Let's talk tax cuts, Steve. How much of a difference has the tax cut, which took effect last year, had on this economy?
Well, I'm very proud of this because I worked on this with Art Laffer and Larry Kudlow, and we put sort of the original version of this together for Donald Trump. And I saw the president a couple weeks ago, and I just kind of laughed. I said, Mr. President, this is working better than we thought it would, and we were big believers in it. But, I mean, it's been a spectacular success. And anyone who looks at the economy today and looks at what's happened with jobs, we've got the best job market in 50 years. We've got the best, economy in terms of growth in 20 years. The economy is firing up. I mean, the tariff battle has taken some of the wind out of the sails of the economy, but it's very, very strong. And I think the tax cuts have increased business investment, business spending, business hiring. It was a very pro-business tax cut. I'm not apologizing for that. We're for American businesses. We want American businesses to be as financially successful as possible so they can pay higher wages and hire more workers. And, Tim, that's exactly what they're doing.
Well, the effect of the tax cut was far greater in terms of the corporate side than the individual side, right? I mean, the significance of the tax cut mostly rested in corporate tax reform. Am I right on that?
That was, to me, that was the sort of gemstone of the tax plan. Our business tax rates were so out of whack with the rest of the world. We were charging 40% on our businesses, and other countries were charging 20%. And, as Larry Kudlow used to say, that's a 20% Head Start program for every country we compete with. I mean,
right.
How economically masochistic is that? I mean, why would you want to – we want to have the most pro-growth tax system, not the least. And I think almost overnight, thanks to Donald Trump, I don't know if we have the best business tax system, but it's a hell of a lot better than it was 2 years ago. I mean, we had companies leaving the United States, Burger King and Medtronic and other major companies, and they told us why they were leaving, because the taxes were too high here. And so now they're coming back. We're very proud of that. Somebody asked me the other day, with this booming economy, is this just, have you noticed now, Tim, they're saying, oh, this is just the Obama economy.
Oh, yeah,
right?
Of course.
I mean, this is the same, Obama 2 months before the election said, Trump, how is he going to do this? How is he going to create 3% growth with 1 million new manufacturing and mining and construction jobs? Are you going to do it with the magic wand? Well, I don't know, Tim. Maybe this president has a magic wand because he's done it. And I think his critics now should just stand down. I mean, what's really interesting to me is I think every Democratic presidential candidate, how many are there now, 22 or something? I'm still searching for one who does not want to repeal this glorious tax cut that has been so good for families and businesses. But this is like a religion to these people. Even though it's good for the economy and good for people's wallets, and by the way, the average family, according to the Heritage Foundation, where I work, is saving about $2,000 to $3,000 a year, which is, I don't what Nancy Pelosi says. If you're making $60,000 a year and you get an extra $2,000, that ain't, what was it she called it, crumbs. I don't think that's crumbs for a lot of people who are living on a fixed income. Literally, Tim, I'm an optimistic guy. You've known me a long time.
Yes.
But I didn't predict the economy would be as strong today. I mean, it's like, the last chapter of my book, Tim, is called A Light Switch is Flicked from Off to On. And that came from a auto mechanic, guy who runs an auto mechanic shop outside of Cleveland, Ohio. And I remember I asked him about 6 or 9 months after the election. I said, Tim, to this guy, Joey, I said, how's business at your company? It's maybe 15 employees. And he said, Steve, it's almost like the day after the election when Donald Trump was elected. A light switch was flicked from off to on in my store, and he said, ever since then, I've had more customers than I can handle. And that's the Trump effect. And, we need 5 more years of this. I mean, did you know we have 1.5 million more job openings than unemployed people in the country today?
Yeah, imagine if the media actually covered that element of the story. I know, Steve, that, for example, our trash collectors here where we live in Northern Virginia, they are sending out emergency bulletins saying they can't find workers to do their regular pickup on Thursday. They have to do it on Saturday because in a booming economy like this, who wants to be a trash collector when there's 1.5 million jobs out there that they need to fill that are higher wage and a little more prestigious and better
And that's
work.
a nice little story because it's a little microcosm of what's going on. So guess what? Those people who are doing the trash collecting, I bet they're probably earning overtime pay now, right?
Yes.
So their wages and salaries are going up. And we wanted to create a very tight labor market because Donald Trump is a working class president. He cares about working. That tax cut was never about helping rich people. But every meeting we had with Trump, he said, I don't care about rich people. They can take care of themselves. It's about the middle class. It's about the people at the bottom. How do you help them out of poverty? Get them a job. Create a tight labor market so they can bargain up their wages. We don't need higher minimum wages, Tim. The wages are going up on their own. The magic of the free market system.
Well, on that note, Stephen Moore, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure, and I think you've opened a lot of eyes and clarified a number of things. Best of luck to you. We'll be seeing each other very soon.
Thanks, Tim.
That is Stephen Moore, and we've got the entire interview with him available in 3 parts at libertynation.com. We'll break away for a moment, then come back with Talkin' Liberty, featuring great news for some people about those much vilified red light cameras and other news regarding your individual liberty.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now we welcome you to the portion of Liberty Nation Radio which we entitled Talkin' Liberty, as we welcome back in our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Tim.
Good news for liberty in the first 2 stories today. Praise God and hallelujah.
Tim,
Texas passes partial red light camera ban.
You're wrong. It's great news for liberty and Texas, Tim. As you know, I love these stories that this is where the rubber meets the road for so many people. You know, they're not subject to grand schemes of oppression, but it's the day-to-day grind that kills so many people in terms of meeting against government oppression. And these red light cameras came in. There's almost no due process involved. You just get a ticket. You can't do much about it. Well, the people of Texas have finally had enough. Their governor, Greg Abbott, campaigned on removing them. The legislature passed the bill. And this is an interesting feature Texas has. I learned about it while covering this story, Tim. If enough legislators vote for a piece of legislation and it passes with a supermajority, it becomes law without even the governor signing it, if it's just that popular.
Is this new law coming into force simply because red light cameras are so unpopular, or is there some sort of constitutional argument to be made against it?
Straight populism, Tim. The people loathe it for good reason, and they finally got rid of it in spite of the financial incentives to the government bodies.
Are there direct constitutional court challenges to the constitutionality of red light cameras? Have there been? Are there now? Will there be? Is there a legitimate constitutional argument to be made against such cameras?
I don't think there has been one that has come up through to the United States Supreme Court or the high-level federal courts. It seems to me that there would be, given the confrontation clause. A lot of these tickets are issued by automatic computer. You can't fight it. You know, if you get a speeding ticket, you can go to court, and the cop has to say, "I saw so-and-so speeding," or "I measured his speed."
So, in other words, what you're saying is, with red light cameras, you don't get to face your accuser.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, another victory for liberty. Colorado. A sniff by a pot-detecting dog requires probable cause and does not justify a search, according to Colorado Supreme Court.
This is part of the wrestling of our laws and society, given the movement into a place where marijuana is legal for adults to consume. Colorado leading the nation, as you remember, with treating alcohol like marijuana in terms of its regulation and laws. And the problem they have is a lot of the drug-sniffing dogs in Colorado were trained to sniff marijuana as well as other drugs.
Right.
Well, if marijuana is legal in most capacities, I mean, there are some, I don't know that you can...
They need to go to re-education camps, Scott.
That's right, Tim, they do. If they want to continue to employ those dogs sniffing cars on the side of the road, which is what they did. So this dog, Kilo is his name, and he's trained to sniff and detect marijuana, methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, and ecstasy. Well, you can't say I'm able to go into and search a car because Kilo indicated there was a prohibited item in there, when one of the things that he will scratch for is a non-prohibited item.
Right.
So, my dog would scratch for bacon or something like that, right? We can't say, well, let's search the car. So they either have to do exactly as you say, retrain the dog, which, as you might imagine, to train a dog to unsniff for marijuana.
It's taken me 7 years to train my dog to sit when I tell him to, and I still haven't mastered it.
So that's a tall order. What they really have to do, Tim, is they're going to have to get new dogs.
A judge says the parents of a dead West Point cadet can use his sperm, saying that their son, who was injured fatally in a skiing accident, can use his frozen sperm to produce a child. Break down this judge's ruling for us.
I think it's a shocking story, Tim. We hear so much in the news today about honoring women's reproductive rights with respect to the abortion story. And then here we have a story where a man is going to reproduce posthumously because of the wishes of his parents. It seems shocking to me. I've never heard of a case like this. There have been cases where surviving spouses who had an agreement to, they were undergoing in vitro fertilization, for instance, and the spouse dies, but there's frozen sperm. They can continue to try to conceive. But in this case, there's no indication at all that Mr. Zhu, Peter Zhu is his name, unfortunately died in a skiing accident. Apparently, brilliant young man, a West Point cadet, but he gave no indication that he wanted to reproduce posthumously, that he wanted to have, there's testimony in the record that he wanted to have children. And presumably he did want to have children, but the idea that you can then say, well, then he probably wanted those children to exist without him as a father in life after he died seems to be pretty fantastic to me.
So let's now move on to the land of fruits, nuts, and flakes, the nation of California, because it is like a separate nation, where Beverly Hills has voted to ban all tobacco sales, but they have exempted the former governor and movie star's favorite cigar club.
No cigarettes, no cigars, no cigarillos, pipe tobacco, snuff, chewing tobacco, smokeless tobacco, and any electronic cigarette, the city ban says, Tim. Mm-hmm. You cannot buy it in Beverly Hills. They've already banned. I think you can't walk down the sidewalk and smoke a cigarette. They were the first, I think, in the country, or one of in 1987, to ban it in restaurants and public places. And I think it's a massive imposition on liberty that these people can't buy legal products in their city.
That's the point. Legal product, but they're going to play God and tell you what's better for your life and what you can and can't do, what behaviors are prohibited, the others that are mandatory. Yes. So it's mandatory to prohibit all tobacco sales.
Unless you're a fancy rich person, and instead of getting your cigarillos down at the corner mini mart, you go to an oak room lined room club, and you have a $27 Havana cigar lit
with your brandy.
Exactly. In that case, brandy. When it's classy, then it's allowed. And that's part of another component to this story, is that it's called, I think, the Grand Havana Club, Grand Havana Room, excuse me. And then that's Schwarzenegger's club. And, the lines are replete with Schwarzenegger says, "I trust that the city will recognize the fundamental difference between clubs like the Grand Havana Room and a gas station selling nicotine pods." Yeah, the difference is you got to be rich to go to the Grand Havana Club. And if you're a regular person, you can go down to the corner store. And you're taking that away from them, basically.
It's also going to eliminate a source of tax revenue for the state of California, and given their profligate spending, they need every dime of tax revenue that they can get.
John Puldar, who owns a gas station in Beverly Hills, said the city is discriminative toward other businesses mainly because our clients aren't powerful. And there you go. If you're hooked up with Schwarzenegger, you're good to go.
That says it all.
Tough.
Yeah, that says it all. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio, plus our podcasts from LibertyNation.com. The Uprising, hosted by Scott And The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose with Mark Angelides, who joined us earlier in the show. All available on demand, anytime, any place at libertynation.com. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week, same time, same station, as they used to say, and still do today, I guess. This is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty, and we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.